Good afternoon. Thank you for finding time to be with us today. The show is Diaspora Dispatches, and here is the latest news from across the continent of Africa. We start with the latest from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and hundreds of demonstrators have taken to the streets for a second day in Goma, in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. At least 2 people died on Monday following the violent clashes between protesters and Congolese security forces. The demonstrators accused the United Nations and the East African Regional Force of failing to support the Congolese military operations against the M23 rebel group. Fighting has intensified in the region in recent days, with the group taking key towns in eastern DRC. Protesters have taken to the streets in several neighborhoods of Goma in North Kivu province, bringing the city to a standstill on Monday. Security forces fired tear gas to disperse crowds who pelted stones and threw petrol bombs at the UN headquarters in Goma. Reports say that a church in one of the neighborhoods was demolished during the clashes. The rebels have captured large territory in the volatile province in recent days and have threatened to march on to Goma, the region's commercial hub. The recent fighting has killed hundreds of people and displaced thousands. The Nigerian agency that investigates financial crimes has arrested a branch manager of a commercial bank in the capital, Abuja, for allegedly refusing to load ATMs with cash despite having the designated banknotes involved. The country recently redesigned its currency, but the changeover has not gone according to plan, as there are not enough of the new notes to go around. This has sparked anger and led to spontaneous protest at banks. The deadline for the use of old banknotes is on Friday. On Monday, officers from the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, stormed the bank and whisked away the operations manager for questioning. It said the bank had 29 million naira, that is equivalent to 73,000 US dollars, of the new banknotes in its vaults, which officers ordered to be loaded in ATMs. It is unclear if the arrested bank manager has commented on the accusations, but the commission said some banks were sabotaging government's monetary policy. Very well, we head over to Malawi. A high court in the country has lifted the government's suspension of the head of the Anti-Corruption Bureau, Martha Chizuma, paving the way for her to return to work. Ms. Chizuma's suspension was last week announced by the Secretary to the President and the Cabinet, Colin Zamba. The suspension was linked to a lawsuit against her following a leaked video in which she is allegedly said to have made remarks suggesting that a number of senior government officials and some judicial officers were hindering the fight against corruption. One official who felt hurt by the suggestion sued Ms. Chizuma, and she was indicted on the basis of the lawsuit. Her suspension was widely condemned by civil society organizations, the opposition, and the country's umbrella body for lawyers, the Lawyers Association of Malawi. The Lawyers Association issued a statement saying the only person who could legally hire or fire the head of the anti-corruption body was the president. So President Lazarus Chakwera is on record as saying he will not sack Ms. Chizuma, describing the recording and the circulation of the audio as corruption fighting back. The Malawi Law Society applied for a judicial review, which the court granted late on Monday. More than 100 people have been killed after a militia attacked their district in northern Nigeria, residents say. Although the state government says the exact number is unknown, witnesses have told media there that there has been more than 48 hours of fighting between vigilantes and the bandits since sometimes last week. It happened in Bakore, Katsina State, and officials there announced an inquiry on Friday, then sent a delegation to visit mourning villagers on Sunday. Yet, despite calling the situation tragic, Katsina State Secretary Alhaji Montari Lawal is said to have told residents not to wait for government, but be courageous enough to confront the devil before they finish them. Wow. Okay. Head over to Somaliland. And doctors in the self-declared Republic of Somaliland say heavy fighting has killed at least 30 people. Residents of Las Anod say they had gunfire for more than 6 hours. Somaliland broke away from Somalia in 1991 but has not been internationally recognized. The authorities there have been in a border dispute with the regional government of Puntland. They both claim the Sul region, of which Las Anod is the capital. The latest violence happened as traditional leaders announced that they no longer wish to be part of Somaliland and pledged allegiance to the Somali government in Mogadishu. And social media giant Meta, which owns Facebook, WhatsApp and Instagram, has failed to stop a Kenyan court from hearing a case that alleges poor working conditions at the company. Meta wanted the case dismissed, saying the Kenyan courts have no jurisdiction because Meta is not domiciled in, nor does it trade from Kenya, but a judge rejected the argument. Former content moderator Daniel Mataung, who worked for local outsourcing company Sama, said he was paid about $2.20 per hour to review posts, including beheadings and child abuse. The toll of the work left Mr. Mataung with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. He alleges he was fired after pushing to form a union to advocate for better working conditions. He said it will also open the door for content moderators to be protected in a court of law in the countries which they live in. And then we head over to Burkina Faso. The family of former Burkinabe President Thomas Sankara announced on Sunday evening in a statement that they will not attend the burial of his remains. Burkinabe government had announced that the body of the nation's reverend revolutionary leader Thomas Sankara is to be buried alongside his 12 comrades at the spot where 1987 they were assassinated, the country's ruling junta said last Friday. The family of Sankara had expressed their wish to see the remains of their relative buried elsewhere other than the memorial site they tagged as conflicting and controversial. The bodies of Thomas Sankara and his 12 comrades were first buried in a cemetery on the outskirts of Ouagadougou and exhumed on the 25th of May 2015 for the purposes of legal proceedings. Thomas Sankara, a Pan-African icon, came to power in a coup in August 1983 and was reportedly killed on 15th October 1987 by his Number two, Blaise Compaoré, who remained in power until popular uprising led to his downfall in 2014. In April, the military court in Ouagadougou sentenced him in absentia to life imprisonment for his role in the assassination of Thomas Sankara and his companions after a 6-month trial. And scores of Sudanese protested in the capital on Monday against diplomatic relations with Israel after last week's surprise visit by the Israeli foreign minister. Dozens of Sudanese protesters chanted no normalization with Israel as they held banners blaming Sudanese military leader Abdel Fattah al-Burhan for committing a betrayal. Monday's protest comes days after Sudanese and Israeli officials announced that two countries are moving forward to normalizing their ties. The announcement was made Thursday after an official visit by the Israeli Foreign Minister Minister Eli Cohen, who met with Sudanese officials in Khartoum. Abdurrahman Khalid, the spokesperson of the Sudanese Foreign Affairs Ministry, downplayed the protest, saying people are free to demonstrate in 2020. The United Arab Emirates, Bahrain and Morocco all normalized relations with Israel as part of the U.S. brokered Abraham Accords. Sudan separately announced plans to establish diplomatic ties with Israel in a deal brokered by the administration of former U.S. President Donald Trump. In January 2021, Sudan's government issued a declaration paving the way to normalizing ties with Israel and later approved a bill abolishing a boycott of the country dating back to 1968. Head over to Ethiopia, and the spokesman of the rebel Tigray's People's Liberation Front, TPLF, Getachew Reda, has said despite organized withdrawal of Eritrean forces from Tigray region, small units still remain in the region. Mr. Getachew made the remarks during news conference with local media after the first meeting with TPLF officials and Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, the TPLF-run Tigray TV reported. And he added that they agreed during last week's meeting with the Prime Minister that federal forces should be deployed in areas bordering Eritrea to ensure security as part of the Pretoria Peace Agreement. The AU brokered a deal between the TPLF and the Ethiopian government in November 2022 to end hostilities and to restore basic services to the Tigray region. And that is the latest news from across the continent of Africa this afternoon. Let's get into this Sudan protest and this peace deal that was signed last week by Israeli Foreign Minister Cohen, who had visited Sudan, I believe. And I think I mentioned it here in passing. So there were protests against that meeting that happened because, you know, Muslim countries had signed a pact, the Arab League, the Muslim countries, but countries who are members of the Arab League signed a pact, I believe in 1967, in support of Palestine against what they thought was the unfair, against Israel, basically. And we've seen how that conflict between Israel and Palestine has been panning out there, sometimes reaching very heightened levels and killings and all that. It's always been ongoing. So in 1967, the Arab League, a summit in Khartoum, agreed on a pact, and the countries that are part of this league agreed that all their members should cut off ties with Israel in support of Palestine. And there are 3 no's that were agreed upon during that meeting, and that forms part of that pact. And the first one is no to peace towards Israel, and no to normalization, having any sort of diplomatic relationship with Israel, with any member of the Arab League, was a no-no, and no recognition of Israel as a state. Now, not now, but I'll find time, and perhaps I'll take us through the issue to do with statehood and state recognition. You know, Palestine is not recognized as a state. It is not a state. It is not recognized as a state. I'll tell you the reasons why, but not on today's show. But anyway, so these 3 no's has advised how these Arab League countries have interacted or not even interacted with Israel. But in the recent past, there has been a renewed sort of diplomatic relationship between these countries and Israel, and they've been warming up. And I think I was talking about this, is it about a week ago, when Morocco had a meeting with Israel, with an official from Israel, on the same matters, trying to restore the diplomatic ties. And perhaps maybe I just mentioned a bit of that history, but I did not get into the details and why it is important. So the policy of the 3 no's, this seems to be now a lot of countries are maybe evolving, and I don't know, evolving from what perspective, or they're just realizing that perhaps having a diplomatic relationship with Israel is beneficial to them. Now, one of the no's of this policy that was established in the 1967 Arab League summit in Khartoum was that Israel is not recognized as a country. Now, if you are having a meeting with officials from Israel, that in the diplomatic world is considered that you are recognizing Israel as a country. So I think they've recognized Israel as a country, because Israel is recognized as a country even at the United Nations, but Palestine is not. Palestine is not recognized as a state, okay? And they have been seeking to have their constitutional process, but you fully can't do that when you are not fully recognized as a state. And there are 2 ways of state recognition. I'll get into that, but not today. It is wide, and it's a lot of information, but I will just bring us this information perhaps later, but very soon, I promise. And things have changed. In 2020, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, they've all normalized relations with Israel as part of the U.S. brokered Abraham Accords. I'll also bring you the details of these Abraham Accords. So U.S. has been very instrumental in trying to repair these diplomatic ties and just trying to get everybody on board, especially during that time that President Donald Trump was the president. So now this meeting that happened on Thursday last week, when an official visit by the Israeli Foreign Affairs Minister Eli Cohen happened in Khartoum, and there were some announcements that were made, and one of them was to restore the diplomatic relations between Israel and Sudan, and Sudan is a member of the Arab League. So there were protests yesterday, and protesters were chanting and singing and saying no. We don't want any normalization of relationships with Israel, and they held banners blaming Sudanese military leader Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. When you know Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, that is the leader of the military junta in Sudan, this military, they're just realizing that running a country is really, really difficult. And when you are in the military, it's different. It's a whole different ball game. So now, things have been becoming very difficult for them. They don't have the kind of perhaps money, financial assistance that perhaps they would have needed. Well, it's good that Sudan was removed from the blacklist of the countries that were said to be supporting terrorism. The 44th president of the U.S., Donald Trump, removed Sudan. Just those are a few things that he did before he left office, because Sudan had been on this list since the early 90s because it was hosting Osama bin Laden and other Al-Qaeda affiliated members. They had offered these people, Sudan had offered these people a safe haven. So because of that, Sudan was blacklisted as country supporting terrorism, and that really went to hurt Sudan so much in terms of its standing in the international community. That means when you have been blacklisted as a country that is supporting terrorism, no investor wants to come to that country and do proper investment, because why would I? Because of the association and that tag. So that has really injured Sudan's standing. So this new leadership under this military leader, Abdel Fattah, they've been trying to perhaps mend ways. I think it's just a way of, let me call it public relations, which maybe is not working very well for them, because things are thick and they need help. Or soon you'll see Sudanese people running around and protesting against the bad economic situations in the country. Remember, it is bread that removed Omar al-Bashir from power. It started as, there was lack of wheat and lack of enough bread, and the fuel prices were high, and before you know it, we've also had you for a very long time, so it's time for you to go. But it started because of bread. Bread brought problems in Sudan. So things are really thick, and the economy is not doing very well, and they don't have enough finances to run the country. So they're trying to just look like they're doing something, and they're trying to, like they're evolving, like they're doing things differently from perhaps what Omar al-Bashir was doing, so that they sort of become acceptable in the international community, and maybe they can have help or grants or loans from IMF and World Bank and these others. So they've been on a cleanup exercise, but that has not been working very well. And so this meeting that they had with this Israeli foreign minister, the protesters there were terming this as a betrayal. They have committed betrayal. And the Monday's protest comes days after the Sudanese and Israeli officials announced that the two countries are moving forward to normalize their ties. I've told you what severed this tie, that a summit that happened, the Arab League summit that happened in Khartoum itself in 1967, that a declaration was made based on 3 no's, and that is no to peace with Israel. Any Arab League country is not aspiring to have peace with Israel. Any Arab League member country is not aspiring to normalize any types of relationship with Israel, and will not recognize Israel as a state. Now, when you're having the modes of recognition of a state, so when you're having these diplomatic relations, you're already recognizing this entity as a state. So they're feeling that these leaders have betrayed the spirit of the Arab League. Maybe this is not working for them. So I don't know if the Arab League, because we see majority of their these members, the United Arab Emirates, it's a big deal. Bahrain, it's a big deal. And we've seen them normalize ties with Israel. So it's just a matter of time that maybe we'll see other countries as well normalizing relationships with Israel. And perhaps they'll find another way to approach this matter, still in solidarity with Palestine. I don't know, maybe they could work out a way that will not harm their own interest, because at this point these countries are only looking out for their own interest, and maybe there's something that they're seeking that they feel their relationship with Israel will be beneficial. The end of the day, when it comes to diplomacy and international relations, the state is at the core. I know there have been some conversations about the state is not the main reverend, as liberals would argue, but the state is always the core. The state's interest always comes first, and is the main referent when it comes to that. Among other things, that is according to some thinkers or some scholars and things like that. But we will not get into that this afternoon. So they have to look at the interest. Bahrain has to look at its own interest. What are we missing out in that we're not having a relationship with Israel? What are we missing out as United Arab Emirates in us not having a diplomatic relationship with Israel? So it is through this, because the world is moving and globalization has made the world a very small place, and so everybody is forced to come together. And so if you're not fitting very well within the puzzle of the international system, and then you are left out, you're left out. So because of the changing times and the changing world and the way the world is, and globalization and all that, perhaps these countries are saying that fine, we do not agree with what Israel does to Palestine, but at the end of the day, we also would want to benefit. I think it will do us some good if we had a diplomatic relationship with Israel, and I think vice versa, because globalization has made us need each other. And talking about liberalism, it's built on cooperation and interdependency. So because of that, and I think a lot of countries and powers think in that form, except a few, like maybe Russia and others and maybe North Korea, who believe that it is the state and the state and the state. But it could be the state, but also cooperation and interdependency has been a way that the global system has been working. We have been forced to need each other. We have been forced to depend on each other through trade, through cultural exchanges, through these other modes. So if you are isolated, then it's not good. And you isolate the other person, then you're sort of missing out. And for this puzzle to fully be put together and work seamlessly. Okay, I hope I'm not getting into the jargons too much, but I'm just saying. So they're realizing that they need to be part of this greater cooperation with Israel. And, perhaps the economies and other things that they could benefit interstate and with each other. It's better when they're having these relations. But still, I don't know if they'll be able now to fully support the cause on Palestine, or how that will work out. But I'll find time, and then I will, like I've told you, Palestine is not recognized as a state. I know it's a shock to many, but I'll come here, I'll find time, and I'll come and explain to you why. And that's why you see, even when I was talking to you about this story of Somaliland, it has declared itself as a state since, is it 1991 or thereabout? Let me just get the exact details. But it is not recognized It is not recognized as a state because there are processes and there are requirements. Of course, there are characteristics of a state, and you realize a place like Palestine, they meet all these characteristics of a state. They have a population, they have a defined territory. Of course, that is disputed in the Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem and all that, and that is the dispute that has been ongoing between it and Israel. And also, they must have a central government. I think the Palestinian Liberation, something like that, I think is in charge right now. They also must have what? They're about 4 or 5 characteristics. So you find that they meet all these criteria, but for some reason and because of the international politics, and you know, at the United Nations, before a country is declared a state, there has to be a vote by the United Nations Security Council, has to endorse that, the UNSC. And you can see the politics that plays out there. So a country like Britain has always been against it. And a country like the United States has always been against it. South Sudan got its independence here in 2011. Everybody at the United Nations Security Council voted it in as a new member. So you wonder, why would you not vote for Palestine as a state? But the history is long and tedious. So if I start getting into that, we might not get to the end of it at the right time, and I may not be able to give you enough information that is useful. So I promise we shall come back here and do a bit of learning and find out why is Palestine not a state. Yeah, the international politics is quite complicated at the United Nations. There, it's just the big boys flexing their muscles in the name of the veto power, and the rest of us, the non-permanent members who attend, are there. We're just spectators because our voices don't matter anyway. Whatever resolution that is passed at the United Nations, the UNSC, the council, which has 15 members, the vote has to be 3/4. But if one permanent member vetoes that vote, then it's useless. So you wonder, how is this thing even good for the world? But okay, all right, I'll just move on from that. But we will have a proper talk about that some other time. I want us to look at the latest protest that is happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And the people there in Goma are protesting against the East African forces, and they're also protesting against the MINUSCO. Is it MINUSMA or MINUSCO? I think MINUSCO. That is the force in the Democratic Republic of Congo, is it? MINUSMA is in Mali. All right, you can correct me down there. But I think MINUSCO, that is the United Nations peace mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So hundreds of demonstrators have taken to the street on the second day in Goma. They did that yesterday. They've done that today. And they're saying yesterday at least 2 people died following violent clashes between the protesters and the Congolese security forces. Now, the demonstrators, the Congolese, they're accusing the UN and the East African Regional Force of failing to support the Congolese military operations against the M23 rebel group. Okay? And there's a video, I think I saw it on Twitter, but I did not get a chance to listen in. But the caption, who had posted it, because I think my president was there, President William Ruto, and other generals, part, I think, of the Kenyan contingent in the DRC, and other soldiers also from other countries. And I think the DRC's President Tshisekedi was really telling them, you have to fight the M23. It was to that, I think that is what he was telling them. And the caption was very interesting. I'll not get into it. But there has been, because I've also wondered, since the going to the TRC of the East African Force, I've not received any reports of progress. I've not received any reports of M23 has been fought back to wherever it came from. And the mandate was very clear, unless we did not hear it correctly. But I guess the mandate of the East African forces outside of the United Nations mission there was to directly engage in a physical way and to fight the M23. I thought that was part of it, but maybe I was wrong. So the Congolese are saying, what are you doing here? The United Nations mission in DRC, what are you doing here? East African Community Forces, what are you doing here? So they are saying the regional force and this UN force have failed to support the Congolese military operations against the M23 rebel group. First of all, being skeptical as I am when it comes to these conflicts, the DRC's conflict, the South Sudan conflict, like these two countries, there's always something behind it, okay? So when I'm sitting here, my mind is telling me there has to be somebody who sponsored these demonstrations. And the reason why I'm thinking like that, and maybe I'm thinking out loud, is because of the different interests that are represented in this conflict. And if you have been following us and listening to our conversations around this conflict, it's not a laughing matter, sorry, then you will understand why I would have this thought process that I'm having right now, sitting here talking to you. And that is because of the different interests, different companies, different countries, different organizations, different people, who have been benefiting and who are really, really invested in the DRC. And perhaps the going there of the East African forces thwarted their plans or was going to work against their interest. And so we've seen a renewed, this is not the first time we're hearing of demonstrators. There's a time the opposition leader, Martin Fayulu, and another person and some organizations were protesting, and they were saying, I think around December, I was, I'd gone for a break, so I did not get to cover that story. But they were saying, they were questioning why Tshisekedi is relying so much on this East African force, and I think they called a press conference, and I did not get a chance to fully talk about this. And now you're hearing of Congolese now demonstrating. I would understand, because I've also been questioning. Maybe I'm a result person. I'm a result-oriented person. You've been there since when? Until now, what have you been able to do? Can you give us tangible reports about the progress and what you're doing in the Democratic Republic of Congo? Or this is just another mission that we'll be spending so much money on, and at the end of the day, we shall not have any tangible results. Okay, so we need to see progress. We need to be updated what is happening, because this now has become our problem since the DRC joined the East African community. So we as taxpayers who are contributing towards paying these forces, I think we have every right to know, and we should be invested in trying to know what the East African community forces are actually doing. What have they been able to achieve so far? Since them going there, I think it's been maybe 3 months or over. So we need to know. South Sudan forces also joined over a month ago. What has been their contribution? They say they're going to make sure the people in the DRC are able to sleep in their homes and they're safe and all that. And the Kenyan forces and the Burundian forces and the Ugandan forces. And I was shocked last week to learn there were also some contingent of the Rwandan forces, which I thought was just a bad idea, period. But what have they been able to do, and the Tanzanian forces, what have they been able to do to achieve so far? So at one hand, I do understand why the people from the DRC, the Congolese, will be demonstrating. There has been an increase of attacks, and now we have this terrorist group, ADF, also intensifying attacks. I think the past 3 weeks, there has been if it's not bombs going off in churches and other places and claiming so many lives. So those activities have intensified, and there's been a renewed escalation of this war. And the peace deal that has been reached and the talks that have happened in Angola and the ones that are being led by a former president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, well, okay, fine, there is a problem in that regard. I will not get into it, but there seems to be some problem with that mediation process. But there had been some progress that had been made so far. So are people upholding parts of that agreement, parts of the, what was agreed upon? The ceasefire, of course, is not holding. And so what is going on? So I understand, on one hand, why the Congolese would come out and protest and say, we just only seeing your presence here, walking around these streets or these villages, but we still get attacked. So what is your mandate? What is your work? What are you here to do? Are you not protecting us fully? But on the other hand, I'm cognizant of the interest and other factors and other players that would not want the East African Community Force to succeed, or the MONUSCO to succeed in the DRC, that perhaps could be supporting and supporting these protesters. So there are just two ways about it. So I think, like I've said before, the conflict in the DRC is quite complicated because of the different interests being represented in this conflict. And I think we've said here and reiterated over and over and over and over and over. I think now it's a broken record. Until we get on to the main issue, until we get on to the real meat, to the real problem, and ask the questions that needs to be asked, and bring the actors that needs to be brought on board, and confront the people and the actors that needs to be confronted, then we will continue just skating around the problem, and at the end of the day we will not find a proper solution. If only people could be honest and just have a proper conversation with an aim of finding a solution, then I guess the conflict will just continue. It will just simmer down for a moment, then before you know it, it has escalated, and the cycle will continue, and at the end of the day we will not find the end of this. So I think these demonstrations, these are quite interesting, and against the United Nations mission and against the East African Regional Force. And so they're saying these forces are not supporting the Congolese military operations. But that's what they have been doing. Those forces have been supporting so much the Congolese government that the M23 was accusing the government and the United Nations, the MONUSCO, of working with the government in support of another rebel group, the FDLR. Did the M23 not accuse the Congolese, the MONUSCO forces of that? Because these agents and these other bodies are working in support of the Congolese government. So why would the Congolese now protest that the United Nations mission there and also the East African Regional Forces are not supporting the Congolese government? Where are they getting these sentiments from? Because the last we checked, these forces are there and they have demonstrated their support towards the Congolese government and the Congolese military. So why are they getting this other notion, and what is really going on, and who is supporting these sentiments? Maybe by the time I come back here tomorrow, God willing, we will have had a statement from the M23 and a statement from the government itself, and maybe we'll have some answers to these questions. But for right now, I'm very curious to find out. I want to thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'm Miriam Agutu. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.